Good afternoon, church family. Alex
Hello.
and I are here, appropriately socially distanced. That's why we're doing this via audio only, because video, there's no way to capture both of us being 6 feet apart. So
Nope.
we're just going to do this audio-wise. And we are in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. We got through halfway through verse 14 last week, so we're going to continue that. To be fair, we did do verses 12 through halfway through 14. So
We planned on doing the rest of the chapter.
yeah,
didn't we? We had
which,
good intentions.
looking back, that's probably not going to happen again today, but that's because there's a lot to talk about here. Just a 15-second review. When Paul wrote this book to the Thessalonica church, it was a church under persecution. In fact, it was under such bad persecution that twice in chapter 3, Paul himself said, "When I couldn't take it anymore." And that's really a profound statement coming from the apostle, that this church was under such profound persecution that he had to get out of there. And how, it's hard to even imagine how difficult it must have been then, because the people who were there had to stay, and he had to get out. And so he wrote this letter as encouragement to them, as teaching for them, and of course there's a follow-up letter that which we'll get into after we finish this book. So that's where we are. We're near the end of the book, and he's giving them some last-minute information and teaching. So, Alex, why don't you start reading? Let's just do verse 14.
Verse 14. All right. We urge you, brethren, admonish the unruly, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with everyone.
All right. Thanks, Alex. We already covered the first admonition there. Admonish the unruly. So now we're moving on to encourage the faint-hearted. Now, obviously, a church under persecution is going to have a lot of faint-heartedness. Faint-heartedness is the same word in the Greek that we would understand to be depression. Prolonged, difficult circumstances that result in not being able to see hope, or even an unwillingness to see hope in some situations. We deal with this in our culture. Every culture has. This is something that I think is quite relevant now because we're in this unknown world with this virus and everything that's going on, and everybody and their monkey's uncle has an opinion. And that's not helpful when we're still trying to navigate this thing, and each one of us is getting through it, in our own way, and also together. So how can we encourage the faint-hearted, both in our present circumstance and also understanding the circumstance they were in, which was religious persecution? So encouraging the faint-hearted. Alex, you have any thoughts on this?
I know first thing that comes to mind is a lot of people who are extrovert who like to go out and be with people and their friends, and it's really hard for them to stay inside and become an introvert all of a sudden.
I don't think you become an introvert.
You don't become
I think
an
you
introvert.
suffer as an introvert.
Yeah.
I know that's what's happening with me.
With you.
I am stir crazy.
You are a people person.
I am a people person, and I am. I you just take it for granted. In the past, you go to the store. I looked forward to meeting random people. I'm that weird guy who walks around Walmart doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but also talking to anybody I run into, and also interacting with people I'm in line with. And can't do that now. Can't go to the Chinese restaurant.
No.
Can't go anywhere really. There's nowhere to go.
No.
And that has been difficult. I have a whole new appreciation for people who are stuck at home all the time anyway. Because some people are.
Yeah.
For health reasons.
Well, just think about when this is over, how much more grateful you'll be to go to church, the Chinese restaurant, to Walmart, and different things, and be able to talk with people, see your friends again, hang out. You won't be bickering about little things, or at least I wouldn't anyway. So.
Well, and here's the thing I've been asking myself about that. Will I still be bickering?
Hope not.
Like, how easy will it be if I don't make a conscious effort not to forget? How easy could it be to fall right back into old routines?
Well, that's history.
And then that's just it, right? Like, I've been thinking about that. Like, I keep telling myself, boy, I'll never take this for granted again. But actually, I might if I don't make a concerted, disciplined effort to remember.
Yeah.
Like, I was thinking about communion in that sense. And this may sound a little off topic, but it really isn't. Why do we come around the Lord's table every week? Because we need that reminder that often.
Yeah.
The Lord thought that after a week's time, it could be that easy to take everything for granted all over again.
It is.
And it's also interesting, and I read this morning when I was studying for this, is that the one thing Jesus asks us to remember every week isn't his birth, isn't his coming, isn't even his resurrection, but his death. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what we need to be reminded of, is the sacrifice, is the necessity of his death to bring about eternal life. And that's what motivates us to self-reflect and self-examine and to ask ourselves if we could improve. And of course, we always can.
Oh, yeah.
Other thoughts about encouraging the faint-hearted that I was considering. When you're out of routine, and this has already happened in my household, of course, with 4 kids out of school and the chaos that surrounds boredom for them, encouraging the faint-hearted means you have to come up with a new routine. Mm-hmm. You can't just miss the old one. You can't just complain about it. You can't just want to go do other things. You've got to come up with a new way of doing things. And that's a sloppy process. I've been talking to other parents who've been doing homeschooling and trying to set up a new routine. And I can tell you that, sure, you can just enforce one. You could just mandate a particular routine. But what I've learned is I start with something that I mandate, but then I have to adjust it because this is uncharted territory.
Yeah.
I haven't been here before. Don't know what I'm doing. I've homeschooled for a total of 2 months, my kids in their entire lives before this. It didn't go great. And I was homeschooled my first 2 years growing up. And I don't have necessarily negative memories about it. I don't necessarily have much of any memories about it because I was 6 and 7 years old. Don't have a whole lot of remembrance of that time. And so, got to come up with a new routine. Got to still do the things we got to do. And we have to maintain a semblance of peace in our household. And I think the end of the verse talks about that. Be patient with everybody. Mm-hmm. I want everybody who's listening to this, and I want Alex and I right now to reflect on that. Be patient with everybody. When you're in the unknown, which is where we are right now, and we're in this situation that nobody in our lifetime has been in before now, you got to be patient with other people. Like, I've met several people, talked to several people who really think they know what's going on and who really think they know what to do. Good for you. The vast majority of us are not there. And that's not a lack of confidence or security. It's just that I'm still surrounded by multiple individuals who are figuring it out. Mm-hmm. And I've got to be the one who's flexible and patient. And demanding people take your view or have your understanding or act in the way that you think isn't patience. Mm-mm. Got to give people time to figure these things out. Even if you're right, you've got to give people time.
Absolutely.
Patience is a biblical value along with all the other ones. And it, in the long run, encourages what's right. It doesn't discourage what's right.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've had a situation where somebody was confident they knew the right thing, and it even turned out they were correct, okay? But they didn't give people time. They demanded their way right then, right now. Well, what does that do with the typical human being?
Doesn't do very good.
It turns them off from it.
Yep.
So not only have you not given people time to absorb it, you've actually inoculated them against truth unintentionally. Mm-hmm. I've seen this happen over and over again, especially with youth.
Yeah.
As a youth minister, previously as one who still works with youth now, who has kids in his home, both teenagers and younger kids, and has constant neighborhood kids and their friends over constantly. Yes, you teach and exemplify and mandate truth, but how you do it is everything. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't let my home be unruly. I don't let things go on in my home that aren't right. But how I enforce that is everything.
Yeah.
If I don't show patience, if I don't show love, if I don't show kindness, if I don't give people second chances, it doesn't matter over the long run. Mm-hmm. Because all people will do in a forceful situation is comply long enough to make you shut up.
Yeah.
But then they're going to go do whatever it is they thought they should do the moment there's no resistance to it. They didn't learn anything.
Yeah.
And I've just learned that with my kids. You know, all my kids require varying degrees of force to get them to do what's right. But I should still only apply the minimum amount of force necessary to get there.
Mm-hmm.
If I go nuclear every time they do something wrong, all I'm teaching them is the moment Dad's gone, the moment the nuclear bomb is gone, I'm going to go do whatever I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But if I, as best I can, ease them into it, love them into it, apply force only when necessary, and only a minimum amount of force necessary, then that gives time, patience for the lesson to set in.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't avoid problems, all right, but you avoid catastrophe.
Yeah.
At least as much as possible. And when something tragic happens as a result of them doing something stupid, you still have to deal with tragedy, but at least you didn't turn that tragedy into hell.
Yeah.
Which some people are fantastic at.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I'm right all the time. I'm not saying this is a perfect mentality. But the Bible verse there does end with, be patient with everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, that means sometimes, actually all the time, we have to have some degree of patience that we exercise.
Absolutely.
And even if we're right, demanding our way immediately is a poor way of making it happen, especially over time.
Mm-hmm.
It'll never stick.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Speaking of telling someone the truth, and you got to be patient with them for them to accept that truth over time. Maybe it'd be like they grew up in denominationalism. Maybe they believed in faith alone or something, and when the truth of baptism comes around, baptism with you receive the Holy Spirit and sins are forgiven. You
It took
become a
me
Christian.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've talked with a lot of friends that I had back in high school and different things, and yeah, I can only imagine what hard truth that'd be, that you have to realize, wow, I need to be baptized. I'm a 20-some-year-old or 30 or 40, 50-year-old, I don't know. But
Mm-hmm. There was two people in this church who were in their 80s who came to that realization.
really,
Yeah. That happened shortly before my time here.
mm-hmm.
But I know it happened. And there was plenty of witnesses that are still here. It is an absolutely important, and it's a biblical truth to practice patience with people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think it says, don't just be patient. It says, be patient with everybody. Be patient with people.
Yeah.
And not just yourself, not just your family and friends, not just the people you trust. Be patient with all men.
Mm-hmm.
Because it takes time to accept truth.
Yeah.
It just does.
I know I'm hard-headed.
Yeah, totally. And I think it was my own experience with this. And even growing up, I wasn't the most well-behaved kid, needless to say. And it was the people who were patient with me that I eventually listened to.
Mm-hmm.
The ones who demanded a 180-degree turn immediately were the ones I always rebelled against.
Absolutely.
Just out of principle.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, if you're going to make my life hell, I'm going to make your life hell. Like, that was my mentality.
Yeah.
And that wasn't right. And I don't mean to be irreverent or to use that term flippantly. That's not my point at all. But that is how people think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was willing to endure a great number of consequences to simply not comply.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, again, it was those people who were patient and who were kind. In fact, the ones who were patient and kind with me always threw me for a loop. Like, I'm trying to make you react, and you're not doing it.
Yeah.
And then over time, I'd be like, okay, you're still nice, and you're in a lot better shape than I am, so maybe there's something to this. And also, they would never say, I told you so. They'd never rub it in my face. Their concern was never their ego. And at the time, that was all my concern.
Yeah. You come to a realization, I want to be like that person.
Yeah, and they didn't profit from it. They weren't trying to use me. And that's when I figured out, okay. The patient people are the ones that always win in the long term.
Yeah.
The long sufferers, the endurance people. I mean, just in the 3 years Jesus did his ministry on earth, how much did he long suffer his disciples? They didn't get it until the very last moment.
Yeah.
All of them.
Mm-hmm.
So be patient. There's so much truth in that. And the older I get, the more I realize that matters.
Yeah.
It takes time. And especially as a young preacher and as a young youth minister, I used to get really discouraged. I thought, is anything I'm saying sinking in? Because these same kids I'd be teaching week after week, like, I wouldn't see some improvement in any of them at all. Some weeks you felt like you were going backwards.
Yeah.
You know, you'd have a good month, and then like one junior worship session or one youth group session, like everybody was a wild animal. And you're like, am I doing any good at all? The truth is, you are. And even among adults, you can have that same feeling of, is anything I'm saying or doing mattering? And then, you see the fruit of it down the line.
Yeah.
It takes patience and time. Like, there's no such thing as being a minister of a church, at least I've learned, for a year or two and really making much of a difference. I'm not saying it'd be zero, okay? And some people, I think, can be more effective more quickly than others. There's always exceptions to the rule. But in general, you got to be somewhere quite a while to have an influence. And not only have an influence, but to truly be entrenched, to truly be invested, and to really have the trust of people. Also, you got to mess up a few times in front of them.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why I always tell silly stories about myself, dumb stuff that I've done. Because I want people to know that I'm not setting myself up on a pedestal. I'm nobody special. I'm not hiding my flaws. I'm in this with you. And I think that throughout Christian history, there's been so much setting up certain people to be these kind of perfect models. And I only want people to look at Jesus.
Yeah.
Sunday when I was doing the tree removal in my yard, I mentioned it during Sunday school, and Chris heard it, and so he came over and he helped me, made sure I didn't remove any human limbs. And I'm still so sore 2 days later. I mean, my upper body's fine. My legs hurt so bad. And I'm not even entirely sure why. But I mention those stories. I talk about those things. I'm not afraid to accept help just because with age and time and the mistakes I've made, I've learned that patience has value. In fact, that only the devil's in a hurry. In fact, if you want to guarantee an idea is probably a bad idea, think of it and institute it immediately. See how that goes.
Well, Josh, if you're too patient with your trees, they're just going to grow bigger, and it's going to be more work.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. And again, there's always the exception to the rule. But in general, patience is best. Most ideas that are good today are still good tomorrow. Most ideas that are good today are still good next week or next month or even next year.
Yep.
Rushing most things is a really bad idea. That old idea of haste makes waste is true most of the time. Which means that the vast majority of the time, you should not be in a rush if you're doing things right.
Yeah.
The vast majority of decisions you make should have had time to sink in.
Yeah. For me, my mental state's a lot better when I'm not in a rush
Yeah.
than when I am.
And let me say one more thing about this before we move on. When I was in sales, if you want to be a dirty salesman, but a very successful salesman, rush people into the sale. You want to catch them at an emotional high.
Yep.
If you let people think about a sale for too long, they will almost always decline, even if it's the right thing to do. So when I was in sales, I had to very much balance that ethic. I had to very much make sure I didn't sell people more than what they needed, but if I waited too long, they would inevitably rethink the whole process and go down a really stupid path, So I get the balance, but at the same time, in general, patience with people is what we should be exercising.
Yep.
And keep in mind too, we don't need to be told to be patient if it's easy. We need to be told to be patient if it's not.
Yeah.
In fact, I've kind of learned that's what the Bible's always telling me is you go down to verse 16, rejoice always. Well, you don't need to be told that if it's easy to do. You need to be told to do that in the middle of persecution or difficulty.
Yep.
It's a choice, not a feeling. All right. I think we beat that enough. The next one is truly worth discussing at length as well. Help the weak. Boy, is there a debate going on in our culture right now about this. Because when it says help the weak, well, that's 3 words. So I did a little Greek study here, tried to look into exactly what Paul meant by the weak. And there's 2 definitions of this word. Now, they're both simultaneously true. The weak are those who are helpless or sick. That's what the weak means. Helpless are those who cannot do for themselves. And sick are those who are too weak to do for themselves. So how you define weak really matters here, right?
Yeah.
Because, let's be honest, words have absolute meaning, but when it comes to everyday conversation and decisions that people are making, they often treat it as a relative idea. For example, if you want help, well, today I volunteer to be weak. I'll look like a victim. I'll put on the pathetic face so that people give me what I want. That's not what this is about.
No.
This is people who are actually unable, and we need to help them, which I think is obvious to people in general. So why would we need to be told this then? Well, it's because this church was under a very difficult circumstance. And when things are bad for you, who do you tend to focus on?
Just you.
Right. So this is a reminder to help other people even when you are struggling. So let's talk about the practical application of that. I think it might be helpful to put it in the modern context, the situation we're in right now. You've got a situation where everybody's belt tightening because of, businesses are shut down, the economy is shut down, things are uncertain. And so it'd be very easy to only take care of your own. And that's the instinctual fleshly mentality to have right now.
Yep.
But at the same time, if somebody else has less than you, they're unable to do anything about it and they're in need, are we under a scriptural obligation? Yes. Which, by the way, won't be easy to do.
Yeah.
In fact, you could come up with all kinds of earthly reasons why you wouldn't. Logical reasons. Reasons that make sense.
Yeah.
But Paul's reminder here is still remember to help the weak. Help those who are unable. This doesn't mean help everybody who cries wolf. This doesn't mean help people who throw up the victim card for a day or two.
Yeah.
This is specifically talking about those who are unable to do it themselves or are too sick to do things for themselves. So any thoughts on that, Alex?
I don't know, kind of what went through my head there is, like, if you had an elderly person who a big limb fell in their yard, obviously you don't want them out there pulling on a huge limb. Go out there, help them cut it up and everything. I think that's just the right thing to do, and that applies to a lot of different instances, scenarios. There's people that shouldn't be doing something who can't do it. You should, if you're a capable person, help someone out.
I have personally known 2 older men who died shoveling snow.
Yeah. What's the age? 55?
55 is when you're supposed to not be doing that. Now, how many men do we know over 55 who will stubbornly go out and do it anyway?
Yep.
So what's the solution for that?
Younger people do it before them. Wake up earlier.
Yeah, that's one thing. And second of all, let me ask you, you mentioned that, so I'm going to be a devil's advocate here because I have these things thrown at me all the time. Because if you're talking about getting up earlier and doing it for them, you're forcing them to comply. Do you see my point there?
Yeah.
Like from our perspective, it's a gift. From their perspective, it's you're taking away the responsibility that I want to bear. So I bring this up because every part of our faith and every part of our obedience is ultimately our choice. Now, the consequences are also ours. So, as a preacher and as a teacher, this is where I've landed. I'm going to do all I can and encourage all I can and teach all I can to help those who are unable or help those who are in danger. But in the end, I can't force them.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, which means there will be, inevitably, tragedy based on those choices. But God seems to allow that at every point. There's plenty of tragedy that was avoidable, but God let it happen. If anything, you might say all of existence is one giant experiment to prove that point. People are more than willing to make stupid choices that put themselves and others at risk, and who knows why.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I've been asked all the time, why would somebody, there's no reasoning behind it. One of the guys I knew who was shoveling snow was in his late 70s.
Wow.
I mean, you could make maybe some kind of argument. Well, I was 55 last year, I'm only 56 this year, and I've actually lost 10 pounds. People could make those kind of debates. once you've hit your late set, don't try to give me any kind of reasoning. You're obviously just being stubborn and doing what you want. And you know what? I am not going to be the person that tries to force you to change. But am I going to discourage you in every way possible? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if this is somebody you love and they're doing something irresponsible like that, I get it from both angles. I get that you're a free agent and you have that choice to put yourself at risk. But I'm also looking at it from the angle of somebody who loves you, who doesn't want to see you die on the side of the road unnecessarily.
Yeah.
Through something that was completely unavoidable. Other people would argue, see how we can go back and forth on this? Other people would argue of, well, this is one of the last things I can do for me, so I want to do it. And I know a lot of men who want to die working.
Yeah.
They don't want to die sitting around waiting to die. I get it. Which is why I think it boils down to, I'm going to discourage that kind of behavior as much as possible, but in the end, you're never going to see me be the one that forces it.
I've also heard people say, well, no one else is doing it. Well, that's another excuse that's out there why people keep doing it, but nature kind of
All right,
a
so
vacuum.
there's the opposite of that, right? There's the nobody else is doing it, but there's also the I never ask.
Yeah.
And both of those things will always be true. And also, it's kind of like how if somebody, and I used to chase people all the time, I would never let the back door of the church be open. I would always, in the moment somebody wasn't at church, I was like chasing them down. You know how many people I successfully chased down? Zero, as far as I know. Like, people always want to give the excuse, well, I stopped going to that church because nobody called me. When you stopped coming to church, you had already made the choice not to come to church. No amount of chasing you is going to make any difference. And by not chasing you, I gave you the perfect excuse, didn't I? Nobody called me. That's why I'm not there. No, actually, you just don't want to take responsibility that you chose not to be there. And that's your choice.
Yeah.
I stopped chasing people a long time ago because I can tell you it is an unbelievable waste of time.
Yeah.
And I'm a people person. And here's the deal. If you haven't shown up to church in a couple weeks, I'm going to give you a call and I'm going to ask. But I'm not going to keep doing it. That's my point.
Yeah.
I'm not going to forget about you. I'll call you. I'll keep track of you. But after a couple of times, it's obvious whether or not you're going to be here. I remember one person I chased for a year, called them every other week for a year.
Oh my.
And you know what? In the end, they still told their friends that nobody called them. So after that, I was like, I'm done. I'm done. If you want to be here, man, I want you to be here. But if you don't want to be here, okay.
You can put a sign out front of the church. So-and-so, where are you at?
Yeah.
Come to church.
You could do that. And none of that's going to make any difference. Because in the end, it all boils down to people's choices. I take responsibility, so should they.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to do all I can, but in the end, it's up to them.
It is.
I can't. If you start, as a minister, I'll tell you this right now, Alex, if you start bearing responsibility for every person who decides to stop coming and focus on that instead of focus on the ones that are coming, you'll lose. There's no winning that battle.
I see that with youth now. There's all kinds of different excuses, video games, sports, you name it. To not
And yet you still have a decent sized group.
Yeah.
And what's funny is the ones that, like, if you look over a 3-year period of time, even though it's been gradual, so you don't notice it so much, but the group changes all the time.
Oh, yeah. It's a totally different group
I mean,
from when I started.
Yeah. When I started here 10 years ago, over half the church is different. Again, it was gradual, so we didn't notice so much, but that's just the way it is. So no matter how much you don't want there to be, there's always going to be a front door and a back door. Everybody likes the front door because that means new people are coming in. But the truth is the back door always exists.
Yeah.
And if you think of a river, a healthy river has water going in and water going out.
Yep.
And
right.
one day I'll be the river going out. Either through death or the Lord calls me somewhere else or whatever. That's just the way it is. And that's one of those tough truths about ministry and life. But the same thing happens in business. The same thing happens, everywhere.
Yeah.
Nothing stays the same as much as we want it to.
I think one of the hardest things is when there's a youth that's starting to grow in Christ and made the choice to be baptized, different things, then they move.
Yep.
It's just like, oh, no.
Yep.
And you follow them on Facebook and different things.
Yep.
And it's like, man.
I can tell you, and it's easy to focus on the ones that don't succeed. Your brain just automatically goes there.
Yeah.
But I'd learned a long time ago, focus on the ones that have.
We have some great youth that
Yeah.
volunteer different things here, definitely.
I mean, there's a girl here, I'm not going to name her name, of course, but I baptized her when she was 5.
Wow.
That was several years ago. Still here, still doing good things. And I mean, I had a lot, and it was a legitimate question. It was absolutely legitimate. Should you baptize a 5-year-old? That is a legitimate question. Was there some risk that she was too young? Yes. Worked out.
Yeah.
Now, does that prove that I should baptize every 5-year-old?
No.
No, of course not. But was it the right thing for her?
Yeah.
Yeah. Turns out you have to judge those cases on an individual basis.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as drawing a line.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's some 30-year-olds who aren't ready. And that's the ironic thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I tell you.
It'd be nice if there's an age given in the Bible, but there's not.
Well, and isn't that wise of the Bible?
Yeah.
Because that would make no sense. You know, a lot of denominations have done that. You know, you go through these confirmation classes, so to speak, and then at 12 or 13 you graduate or something. Or, you know, even in Judaism, there's something that happens, you know, in your young age.
Yeah.
And you know what? The age makes no difference. You know, I didn't take my faith seriously, or I didn't really have a faith seriously and practice it on any level at all till I was 17. I was 26 before I was mature about it. And I look at, you know, there are some young people in this church who were baptized at 7, 8, 9 years old who are now adults who have always been faithful.
Yep.
Not that they've been perfect, but they've been here and they're doing their thing. So, man, it just varies per person.
It does.
And I know that people don't like that kind of delineation, but it is just the way it is. It's a tough thing.
It is. There's a lot of that in the Bible.
I would like to say that was a daytimer's tangent. That's what happened there. But hey, good discussion. All right. The last part of the verse, well, we already talked about it. Be patient with everybody. That's something we're really worth thinking about. All right, read verse 15 for us, Alan.
15. See that no one repays another with evil for evil, but always seek after which is good for one another and for all people.
Okay. Now, this is a Bible verse that's repeated multiple times throughout the Scriptures, both Old and New Testament, the idea that we shouldn't repay evil for evil. Now, that sounds obvious, right? And I think every Christian would be like, well, yeah, of course.
Until evil happens to you.
Right! Right! That's my point. How many times... again, we wouldn't need to be told this unless we need to remember it when it's happening to us. Like, again, rejoice always in verse 16. You need that verse when things are bad, not when things are good.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing here, that we don't seek revenge under any circumstance. And we also, and I think this is a key part of the verse that's often missed, we don't use other people's behavior as excuse for our behavior. I've seen this I'm sure I've done it, okay? But this is so common. I wouldn't have done so-and-so if this person had done so-and-so.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. 100,000 times percent not at all. Especially in leadership. Don't be in leadership if you can't take the heat. And I say that as advice to you, of course, as you're up and coming, but also to anybody. Like, I'm always impressed with the armchair theologians and the political pundits on their couch, right, who think they know how to run everything.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't either. Like, that's the secret, right? What are we supposed to do? Good question.
Yeah. Not just black and white.
Right. I've learned in leadership, it's not about always having the answers. Sometimes you just need to be the one who can take the heat. Like right now, we're in this time of uncertainty. Everybody has an opinion. Some people have no opinion. There's a lot of unknowns. What do you do? Good question. So when you're in leadership and you have to make choices, it's going to be very obvious to some that you should do this, and very obvious to others that you should do that. And it's this endless tug of war. But if you're in leadership and you have any sense, you know that really nobody knows everything yet.
Yep. Or when you see on Facebook or different places what certain churches are doing, certain people are doing. You like
Right.
that better, and why aren't we doing it? Well, we haven't seen the
Well,
consequence of it either.
And even if you have, again, a lot of these things don't boil down to reason.
No.
You know, because you could quote this person or quote this circumstance or that anecdotal story. I mean, that's a rabbit hole you can go down that has no end.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, in leadership, you have to make the call that you think is the wisest call to make. And if you have to choose, and just to give you my mentality here, if you have to choose between risking waste and risking lives, I'm going to risk waste.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could make the argument all day long, oh, there's no risk to life. Well, that's what you think.
Yep.
And you could be right. But that's still a risk. That's still a chance.
It is.
And you have to, and here's the fun part, right? If you're the person not in leadership, you don't have to live with the consequences of that choice, do you?
Nope.
But those in leadership do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come to realize over my 20 years in leadership between business and church and organizations and everything else, that your number one job is to be the one who can take the blame. And that's fine. I'm going to be blamed either way. There's going to be people on both sides of every debate who don't like the decision I make or the decision that I recommend. I don't actually even make any decisions. It's just my influence, just my voice.
Yeah.
But I'm still going to be blamed for it. And that's fine. Like, that is just the way it is. There is no such thing as making the right decision every time. In fact, you wouldn't need leadership if the decision was always obvious.
Yeah.
Then everybody would just do what was obvious, right?
Well, what kind of leader are you if you have no complaints?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, actually, that's a good point. What kind of leader are you if you don't have any complaints? You're a dictator.
yeah.
If you don't have any critics, what are you? You're a dictator.
Just, yeah.
If people aren't allowed to criticize you or what you think, you're a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely encourage criticism. Now, not malicious criticism,
No.
but if you have a legitimate concern or complaint, you should absolutely feel like you can air it.
Absolutely.
And I don't keep people from talking about me, not whatsoever. That's between you and God.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to stand in your way. That's the difference between leadership and being a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
Is you can take the heat from both sides and be blamed from both sides and still make a call and still live with yourself.
Yeah.
Welcome to
Still
it.
live with yourself.
Yeah. Good times, right?
Absolutely.
That's just the way it is. So, getting back to this idea that we shouldn't repay evil for evil. Well, so regardless of who disagrees with me or who says what about me, I can never have that mentality towards them.
Mm-hmm.
Ever. I can't wish them any harm, ever. I can't think of them less as a result of that. And I've seen many leaders, and I've learned from examples from many leaders who've done this, who wish ill will on their critics, who don't want them around, who want them to go away, who actually try to orchestrate such, and it always backfires. 100% of the time. Short term or long, it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure that, again, there's always an exception to a rule. I'm sure that there are some circumstances, especially in war or, military, where there's not room for question and criticism.
Yeah.
That's not what this is.
Not at all.
No. And if you want to equivocate those things, again, it'll backfire.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that ends well.
No.
So, and I only speak on this understanding that I sometimes make wrong decisions and sometimes advocate for the wrong things. The best I can do is be willing to take responsibility for that when it's all over.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also learned that if I give in to peer pressure when I am convinced otherwise, that's usually when I make the worst decisions. Especially when it comes to my own life. When I was a younger adult, I would regularly just do whatever other people wanted just to avoid conflict. Well, that always resulted in disaster.
Yeah.
Like, you eventually have to take the reins of your own life and if you're the one taking responsibility for your decisions, then you should be able to make the decisions. Mm-hmm. And what happens, at least it's, like, when I was in business, I could live with fixing my own mistakes. But fixing the ones that other people had made for me, that's not livable.
Yeah. Yep.
So who takes the responsibility ultimately has that influence or authority sometimes. And I think that balance between authority and responsibility is a really good way of looking at leadership and decisions in uncertain times. You know, the one who has to bear the weight, they should have a say.
Yeah.
And you know what? If it's all for naught, if it's all wrong, well, if that person's willing to accept responsibility, then that's as good as it gets. Welcome to our imperfect, fallen world. It's a tough thing. All right, well, I think we'll cover one more verse and we'll call it a day because we're at 40 minutes here.
It's a long verse. Are you ready?
Oh, yeah.
Rejoice always.
This is a good one to end on,
Yep.
don't you? And I was reading this, I thought, man, I needed to hear this. Not because my life's miserable, not at all. But again, I'm an extrovert. I'm stuck indoors. I'm only going between the church and my home right now. Otherwise, I'm just calling people, checking up on them. That's all there really is to do. And you don't want to do that constantly, or you just annoy people. You know, the vast majority of people will let you know if something's up.
Yeah.
They're just trying to get through it too. You know, there's not even a whole lot to talk about because what do you talk about? You normally talk about what you're doing.
Not doing anything.
Not doing a whole lot.
So, how's your couch?
Right. You know, Alex and I have been working on some stuff at the church, and we're still doing our lesson plans. We're still doing all that. We're still contacting people, but it's not as busy as it was, and there's no way to make it that way.
No.
And that's tough. That's not something that any of us want. In fact, that's why I was lumberjacking Sunday afternoon. You know, taking down some trees need to be taken down. That's not part of my normal routine, obviously.
Yeah.
But this idea of rejoice always, it's this reminder that you got to find the joy and the peace. You've got to make that a concerted effort. You can't just wait for it to come to you. This is something I'm constantly talking to my teenagers about. If you wait for motivation to do something, you'll never do it.
You'll always be waiting.
Yeah. If you wait for somebody to bring you happiness, they never will. Because what you're really saying is, well, if somebody else should bring me happiness, well, that somebody else is you in another form. Why aren't you bringing joy and happiness to somebody else?
We have expectations for someone else to bring you that joy, and no one ever holds someone's expectations. So
Right.
You're always disappointed at the end, even when
Right.
someone does say something nice to you. It's like, well.
Well, and something that I try to reinforce with like young people is you don't want to be in a dating or marriage relationship with somebody who isn't happy. Because you're not going to make them happy. And they're not going to make you happy. Like people think they've got to be coupled up to be happy. If you're convinced of that, you have a 100% chance of failure.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the happy people think they can draw the sadder person to happiness.
And that's
but
not the way it
I've
works.
seen it happen the opposite, where the sad person draws the other person into sadness or depression.
Actually just drives them crazy. That's
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's a natural law, really. When you have a bad spot on an apple, does the good part ever take over the bad?
Nope.
0% of the time that occurs.
Throw it all away or cut the bad out.
Yeah, that's all there is to do. And that's true too. In fact, I was listening to, and this is my last illustration. I was listening to a weight loss blog because I'm trying to lose weight. Lost 13 pounds, haven't lost any, but I haven't also gained any in the last 2 weeks, which I feel like
Well,
that's
good.
not bad considering the present circumstance. That's one reason why I went lumberjacking Sunday. Anything to move and to do stuff.
Yeah.
Well, one of the weight loss blog, this was a bariatric doctor, so one of who does those surgeries and helps people through extreme weight loss, and he's been doing it for 30 years. He said, let me tell you something right now. If your best friends are fat, good luck. And that was a really tough truth to hear. Like that just hit me because I'm somebody else's fat best friend. Like because I'm not losing the weight, I'm keeping somebody else, or at least I'm influencing them.
Yeah.
But he says, you become the average of the people you're around. And it just well, and I teach that when it comes to faith.
Yeah.
I do. Like, I teach that if you hang around other faithful people, you hang around Christians, not only Christians all the time, but in general, your close group of friends is faithful to the Lord. Well, that's a biblical principle, right?
Yeah.
Well, it totally makes sense when it comes to weight loss. So now it put a burden of responsibility on me, something I needed to hear, because if I'm going to help other people be faithful, I've got to be faithful. If I'm going to help and encourage other people to be healthy, I've got to be healthy. So, yeah. Whew. And I'm going to need a reminder to rejoice always to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, especially Kara. She's such a good cook. She made this Velveeta potato chip, potato casserole thing that had no business in Weight Watchers. But, you know, we were lumberjacking, and so I ate some because
It balances out.
it kind of did. But at the same time, you know, it's like, wow, you know, if I'm going to encourage other people to be healthy spiritually, I've got to be spiritually healthy. But if other people are going to be physically healthy around me, I have got to be the one who's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh. Oh, man. That was a really convicting thing. Like, when I heard that, I hit pause in it because it was like a punch in the gut.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a good-sized gut. I mean, wow. But it's so true. So I feel bad for you, Alex, because you hang around me. So, you know, you're doomed if I don't get in
always
shape.
Encourage me with like plate 0 at daytime.
Yeah, I know. I'm bad. I'm bad.
So is that plate 0 going to go away? Or are you going to finally say this is plate number 1?
I'm going to have to be honest at church as a preacher. Come on. That's rough.
Hey, we're doing pretty good on meals for daytimers. I didn't eat very good.
Yeah, we haven't had anything to eat for a few weeks now from daytimers, which you would think that would, you know, if I'm going to blame church ladies for making me fat, you know, obviously that isn't true because I haven't lost any weight and they haven't been here to cook. But
they keep on bringing good meals when we get back to normal.
Yeah, I tell you, this whole lockdown thing is going to make me an honest preacher. Who knew? I had a funny meme sent to me this week. We'll end on a bit of humor. Several people have sent this to me, where it's a picture of Tom Hanks as Forrest Gump, and he's kind of got that, you know, blown away look on his face. And I'm not advocating for the movie. I'm just telling you what the meme is. Okay, I'm not advocating for anything or Tom Hanks or any of that. I'm just telling you what the meme looks like. All right. So there's Tom Hanks as Forrest Gump, and he's kind of got that astonished look on his face, and it says, "And just like that, my preacher became a televangelist."
Yep, we are televangelists.
So now when I rip on a televangelist, I got to include myself in the bunch potentially. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's rough.
That is rough. Scratch out a few jokes now.
Yeah, well, that's okay. Kind of a funny thought on leadership. People should be able to make fun of you. Mm-hmm. Now, not maliciously, of course, because you wouldn't do that to somebody else. But every man's court needs a jester. Mm-hmm. There's funny things about everybody. And if you own it, you're so much better off as a leader. Mm-hmm. You know, I had a friend, I think you were there. Yeah, I was at NYR. A friend of mine, who was a missionary, he had just flown in. He had been like no sleep at all. And he told a story about a three-legged chicken.
Three-legged chicken.
And I mean, the moment he said it, he caught himself. But he just said it in front of like 2,000 people. Mm-hmm. Oh. And so we were talking afterwards, and I said, man, just own it. You're now the missionary with the three-legged chicken. And here's the deal. If you own it and you just laugh about it and have fun with it, people will still listen to everything else you say. Mm-hmm. But if you start using excuses and everything else, look, everybody knows you're tired. Everybody knows you're flying. Like, everybody's sympathetic to that. But if you own it, then people will be like, all right, I like this guy. I'm going to listen to what he has to say. I'm going to support what he does. And it's just the funny nature of things.
Or on the way back from NYR, you fell asleep on my shoulder.
Yeah, and then of course that picture is still in the computer and it gets shown every year. So you've got to be able to do that. It's so important. You've got to be able to laugh at yourself and be willing to be laughed at. Not, again, maliciously, but just have fun with it. Own it. Mm-hmm. It's fine. Oh, yeah. Leaders who demand nobody ever makes fun of anything they say or do aren't going to last.
Or people are like, why do you do that silly song in VBS, Father Abraham, jump around like a monkey? Well,
because once a year I do that for the kids, and it's fun. We do it together. It's the only song I can sing because the video is louder than I am. So it works out, and it's a good time. And also the kids, you know, if you do fun things like that, silly things like that, I can't tell you how many times years later I've had them come up to me and need to tell me something important. Mm-hmm. But I was silly with them that one day. Yep. So they know that I can be with them on their level. Absolutely. You know, and that makes it all worth it. All right, well, 49 minutes.
Wow, we went over.
Yeah, I think I might. Well, you know, I can't go get a second lunch. That'd be anti-Weight Watchers. But the temptation is there, may I add. All right, well, thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you soon. God bless.